Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So previously in these classes of the Mutn Abu Shujaa, we talked about the different types of transactions. In the last transaction that we went through, or the last couple, we went through the shufra, which is like preemption right, and then we talked about qirad, and then we talked about musaqa. And musaqa is like a type of farming contract, which is where someone has certain trees and whatnot, and for someone to take care of the trees and to water them, then he would make a deal with a person that he would split the whatever the produce is that comes from it. He would split that with that person at a certain, however he wishes to do that. But a certain portion of it would be for the worker, and the other person would be for the owner of the actual land. And so we talked about that and a little bit of the conditions for that, and we'll come back to it because this is something that is similar to another transaction that's coming up in the next couple of chapters here. And so the next thing that the author here is going to talk about is Ijarah, which is renting. And renting is, of course, one of the most, you have like buying and selling, and the buying and selling, which is called bay'. This can be buying and selling an actual thing, and this is what we would normally call like bay'. But if you're buying and selling actual benefit, this is what we would call Ijarah. And buying and the selling of the benefit can happen with a benefit that is a specific benefit to an individual. So like you're buying a certain individual's like talent or expertise, or you're just buying this particular work to be done. Or say like, for instance, you're renting a car, and so like if you rent this car, this is a particular car that you're renting. This is the car, and you choose this particular car. This is one type. And then there's also another type where you are renting any car, but for this period of time you want a car that meets these specifications, and you need a car rented for this period of time. So say something broke down in that car, then in this case they would replace and put another car. But if you were renting a specific car, in this case, if this specific car broke down, then the contract would be invalidated from that point on, and then you would pay like how much would be according to that. Well, we'll talk about some of the issues of this, and he's not going to go into the breakdown of these two different types of Ijarah, but he's going to talk about some of the basic principles. The author here, Abu Shujaa, rahimahullah, he'll talk about some of the basic principles that have to do with Ijarah. So he says, فصل وكل ما أمكن الانتفاع به مع بقاء عينه صحت إجارته. And so he says that anything, this is the basic principle here, he says that anything that is permissible for someone to benefit from without being consumed is also permissible to rent if its benefit has been specified in one of two ways. And so he's going to mention here. إذا قدرت منفعته بأحد أمرين. And so if its benefit has been specified, and this is also a key point, like with Ijarah, the benefit needs to be specified, because if it's not specified, then we don't know what we're paying for. And this is an aspect of jahala, or like that is unknown, ambiguity, that we can't have when we're doing a transaction. People need to know what they're paying for. And so he says, of these two ways, the first one was بِمُدَّةٍ أَوْ عَمًا. And so it's either needs to be specified for an allotted time. Say if you have like a car, you're gonna rent this car for whether it's 6 months, a year, whatever this time is, it needs to be specified. Or work, such as like an actual job. So you have say someone is doing like a like they need a job to be done. So I have someone that's going to make me, say I'm going to have someone make me a suit, and this is the job it's specified. This suit needs to be made, and so I'm going to pay this person, I'm going to give him the things that he needs to do to make this suit, and he's going to work on this, and this job is known what the outcome needs to be. And so these are the two things that it needs to be specified with either the time period that's going to do a allotted time, or work, like the actual job itself. And the next thing that he's going to talk about is the if some of these things are left unknown, like if someone doesn't say it right away, what are we going to hold it to? So he says, وَإِطْلَاقُهَا يَقْتَضِي تَعْجِيلَ الْأُجْرَةِ إِلَّا أَن يُشْتَرَطَ التَّأْجِيلِ. And so he says, and if the time of the payment for the Ijarah is not specified, so if nobody tells when the person is supposed to pay, is he supposed to pay first or before the job is done, or is he supposed to pay after the job is done? He says then it should be paid for upfront, and so it should be paid for upfront. This is the basis of the agreement. It'll be paid for upfront unless delaying it is made a condition. And so this is, if someone wants to delay it, and they say sometimes this is known. So if someone's doing like getting an Uber, this is a type of Ijarah. And so normally the person would not pay up front, and this is just what is known in the culture. You would pay at the end of the thing. But if it's not specified and someone's going to do a certain type of Ijarah, then that person would normally pay up front. He has to pay up front first and foremost, unless there's a condition that he can pay at the end of it. And the same thing, like if someone's renting a house, this is normally what happens. That someone would pay up front first and foremost for the rent before they would even get into the property. And of course, this is to protect the right of the renter, so that his right of someone, maybe they use a benefit, and then at the end of it they're not going to pay, and this of course can have a great harm for that person. And then the next thing that he goes into is he says, rahimahullah, وَلَا تَبْطُلُ الْإِجَارَةُ بِمَوْتِ أَحَدِ الْمُتَعَاقِدَيْنِ. And then he says that the Ijarah is not nullified by the death of one of the two contractual parties. And there's certain contracts between people that if someone dies from it, then this is something that would invalidate the contract. And we mentioned this a little bit, that he mentions in sharika, which is like a type of business transaction. If someone dies from this, then the transaction falls apart. And so he says here, this type of transaction, if it dies, then in this case it's not nullified by the death of one of the two contractual parties, but rather the people, like the inheritors, they would take over this thing for that person. So say it's the renter that died. In this case, the inheritors of the property, they would take up they would have to fulfill the contract, that is the agreement between the renter and the person who's getting it. And so they would finish it off until it's time that is agreed upon, and then after that they can figure out what they want to do with that once they finish the contract. But the fact that he died, that doesn't invalidate the contract. The contract is still goes. And the same thing if someone is renting, and then he passes away, then it would be up to his family to take care of the rest of how they're going to deal with the rest of that contract. And so the next thing that he goes into here after that is he says, وَتَبْطُلُ بِتَلَفِ الْعَيْنِ الْمُسْتَأْجَرَةِ. So as I mentioned before, the Ijarah, or the renting, happens in two ways. One of it is if someone is actually renting an actual item, like a specific item. They're renting this specific item. So if this specific item, if it falls, say it breaks and it's no longer usable, or someone was renting this house and then all of a sudden this house something is majorly damaged and it's not livable anymore, or it's not something that would normally be say electricity is no longer able to come into the house, this is a major issue. And so in this case, in this particular house, the contract would be made void. And there's a basic principle in fiqh when it comes to transactions, is the anything that is void or it's not usable is like a contract that is usable. So if something is a bad contract, there's something wrong with it, then it would be treated as if it was a good contract when it comes to who pays, when it comes to domain or liability, or who pays who. So we would treat it as if it were there. So if it was a longer period of time of rent and then it was cut to this, then we would treat it for only that period that person would have to pay for. And so if he paid up front, then he would get back the portion of the money that would be for that time that it's no longer available. And so if it's an ayn, if this is of an actual thing that he's no longer for that thing that he's actually renting, this particular thing, if it breaks or is no longer usable, in this case, the contract is over. As opposed to, as I mentioned before, if it's an actual benefit. So say I'm paying for a trip to go tour a certain place, and yes, there is a tour guide that's with us, and then something happens and he's no longer able to be the tour guide. Okay, then the tour company, if I didn't specify any guide and whatnot, and he's not specified, they need to come up with another tour guide and we finish the job, because I'm paying for the job in general, not a particular person in that. And I hope that makes sense. So it wouldn't, if so, that person, if he was down, then they would have to get another person in place of him. And these are the two types of ijarah. He talks about the one side, which is the specified thing, and I just brought this other one up to kind of complete the picture here. And so he says, وَلَا ضَمَانَ عَلَى الْأَجِيرِ إِلَّا بِعُدْوَانٍ. And so he says, the last thing here is, there is no liability upon the renter except with negligence on his part, or like udwan, which is like which is something that is that he's going over the bounds in this issue. And so of course, say someone is renting, maybe they're renting a tool set or whatever, so they get this tool set and they're using it as they're using these tools as they would normally be used, and all of a sudden, say the drill, it just burns out, and he's not doing anything crazy with it. He just used it normally as it would be used. In this case, if the drill burned out, he's not liable for replacing this drill for that person, because the whole point of the transaction is for him to benefit from this thing as normally he would benefit, and he shouldn't be held liable for these extra things. But if, say, he was using the drill like on something that normally wouldn't be used for, or he's using like something as a hammer that shouldn't be used as a hammer, of course, and then it breaks, he's held liable because it was his negligence on this part, and this is something that he would be held liable for in this case. And this is similar, some things in the actual contract, they will say this person will be held liable for this, and that, and the other, but the basis is, when it comes to renting and these things, that this person would not be held liable for anything unless he's doing it in a way that is using this item or thing in a way that normally would not be used. And so this is the chapter here on Ijarah, or renting. Are there any questions before we move on to the next one?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I think I asked the same question a few classes ago, but I just wanted to re-ask it because there was a dispute that happened between two brothers. Letting somebody borrow your car and like you're using it normally, and for example, like you go to pull up the seat and that leads back the leather, and it breaks off. Just nobody's yanking up, and ain't nobody doing nothing crazy. At that point, the renter, the person who loaned the item, would cover that, or he wouldn't hold the person borrowing the item liable for that, right?
There's two different issues here. One, is he borrowing it or renting it? If he is actually borrowing it, then there's no payment going back and forth from the actual use of this car. He's borrowing it. Yeah. In this case, he's held liable for anything that goes wrong with the car while it's under his hand.
He's not liable.
He's held liable if he's borrowing it. And this was in a couple chapters ago. Yeah. So if he's borrowing it, he's not paying anything in essence for this person. So anything that goes bad with the car, even if it's something normally that shouldn't happen, he's still held liable for that. And so he would need to pay for the amount of damage that he did. Of course, you would look at how much is the damage. But if he's renting it, that's different, because he's actually putting out money for this person, and this person who's renting, the renter, he is basically, he's getting money in for his item, and normally he expects for things to go wrong here and there. So and so he would have this, and he's getting something from it. Yeah. So there's a difference between these two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah. Walaikum salam.
I'm wondering, like, in our modern world, renting is really different than how it used to be, or how that sort of frames it. I'm wondering, like, how to morally think about things like, a multi-billionaire buying thousands or tens of thousands of houses, and sort of jacking up the price and sort of extorting people with rent, and how that sort of changes the, the sort of moral quandary there, I guess.
There's a big principle that is one of the biggest principles in fiqh is la darara wa la dirar, like that there should be no harming and there should be no like reciprocating in harm. And so some things you can see that there's a harm, but we can't necessarily quantitably point our finger at what exactly it is. And so this is a tricky area that it takes like someone to look at and like actually point to that. And there's also things such as ihtikar, which is like monopoly, like having a monopoly of something that people need and then stopping people from getting it except by raising the price over something that would normally be there. And this is something that like the government would look into, and they would make sure that nobody is oppressing someone with their prices in this. But the basic essence for the basic principle is that the renter and the person who wants to rent from him, they all come to an agreement, and whatever they agree upon, this is it, and they have to both be happy. No one else should be coming into it. This is the basic principle. But if there is something such as like and this a lot of times with food, it's like with staple foods and whatnot, this is something that is talked about, like in the majority are on the fact that the government has a right to come in and like stop someone from seriously harming people with this. And of course the same thing would go for like drugs sometimes that people need, such as like insulin. This would be something that the government would have a right to stop people from raising this over, like the people don't need this money, like this extra money. So this is these pharmaceutical companies and whatnot. This is something that would be looked at, and it would be looked at from like a government. They would have the right to come in and peg some certain prices. But these are in certain circumstances that this would be. Wallahu ta'ala alam.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's a very good answer.
Yeah. Any other questions on Ijarah before we move on to the next one? And Joanna? All right. So the next chapter that we're going to go into is something that's called Ju'ana. And so this is, in Ijarah, we have to make sure that all of these aspects that we're paying for, this is something that's actually known. So if someone is going to do this job, it's a known job, or it's a known time that they're going to do this. And this you can't have a lot of things of like unknown areas and in that particular job. But there's another type which is a little more open, and this is called ju'ana or ji'ana. There's different ways of saying it. And so this is a reward. So of the ways that this would be put out, say I lost my wallet, and my wallet has a bunch of cards in it and whatnot, and I said whoever finds my wallet and returns it to me, like with my cards and whatnot, then I'll give them $50. This is I don't know who's going to do it. I'm just putting it out there. I tell the people, whoever gets me back my wallet, I'm going to give you $50. So this is the type of this is called like ju'ana, or like a reward. So, and this is of course we need this. Like people need some type of incentive to get someone to do something for them at a certain place. And this can be something that's open, such as I mentioned here, returning my wallet. In this case. And it can be something that is specific to an individual. Say like sometimes lawyers. You'll get a lawyer, and his price is this type of transaction. You say if you get me this, like if you get me my rights on this, then I will give you a portion of what comes out of that. Or I'll give you this money if you get me this. If he doesn't get it done, he doesn't do the job, and then in this case he wouldn't get it. But it needs to be something that he can actually do. So there's different ways of looking at this transaction, but this is a different transaction than Ijarah in a couple different ways, and that the amal, or like the work, is something that is majhul. It's something that we won't necessarily know exactly what it's going to take to do this. And then also this is something that is without someone specifically specified, as opposed to like Ijarah, you're specifying the actual person that you're doing this agreement with. And also this is like a reward. Like this is a reward type agreement instead of like an actual contract that's binding back and forth. And then also the amal, or like the person who's doing this, he doesn't actually deserve anything until the amal and like this work has been completed. And so if he did some work and he tried to find my wallet and he points me in the right direction, but he didn't get me my wallet, in this case, he doesn't get anything. He doesn't deserve anything from me. And maybe if I want to give him something from being nice, that's one thing. But if he didn't get me the actual thing as it was described, then in this case, it wouldn't. He would not be deserving of anything, or like he wouldn't have a right to anything until he finished the whole thing, as it was supposed to be done. So these are some of the 4 differences between the Ji'ala and Ijarah, which are slightly different though. And so the other, so he's going to talk about the Ji'ala here. And the thing he says here, the author Abu Shujaa, he says, Faslun, wal ji'alatu ja'iza. So he says it's permissible. Like this type of transaction, this ji'ala, is permissible. And then he gives an example of what it is. He says, وَهُوَ أَنْ يَشْتَرِطَ فِي رَدِّ ضَالَتِهِ عِوَضًا مَعْلُومًا. So he says, and it's to give a known reward for returning a lost item. And so this is the an example of a definition by example here, such as like returning a lost item, but it's bigger than this. Like as I mentioned, it can be for something that someone needs to be done. Whoever does it, then they'll get the reward. And so this can be with an individual, or it can be with just in general. Whoever gets this done, then they get this reward. And so also he says here, فَإِذَا رَدَّهَا إِسْتَحَقَّ ذَلِكَ الْعِوَضَ الْمَشْرُوطَ. And so he says, and if he returns it, so if like in this example, if he returns the item, then he deserves that specified reward. And so this is of the examples that he gives here. And of course, there's a couple things that are needed for the actual going back and forth. So the person who is going to do this action, and he's going to get this item for this person. Say he's getting my wallet from me. In this case, that person, before he deserves anything from me, he needs to know that I actually said that this person does. This person, whoever gives me back my wallet, he needs to know that I actually did this transaction, like that I actually told people, whoever gives me back my wallet, I'm going to give them $50. So say I said this to a group of people, and then another person, he found my wallet, returned it to me, he didn't know I said this. This person in this case, he would not like be deserving, or like he wouldn't have a right to the $50 because he didn't know about this from the get-go. And so this is one of the conditions for him to actually have a right to it, is for him to actually do this knowing that this is what should be done. Of course, like if someone wants to give to him, that's good. But for him to have like a right in the court of law for this thing, no, he wouldn't have the right unless he knew that this person said this. So that's one thing for it. And also if someone went out on a job to do it, and then I change my mind. I can change my mind at any time with this. Like this is something that the person can change his mind, but he should let people know that knew about this. He should let them know that I'm no longer giving a reward for this. Like I canceled the reward for this thing. But say someone does it and he didn't know, and the message never reached him that the reward was canceled. And in this case, and he went and did this work. In this case, he would get the ujra. He would get it as if it was renting. So you would look at how much would this be, this work, if someone was renting, and he would get this amount here. And so there's definitely like other details to this transaction that the author here he doesn't necessarily mention. But of course, this book is a very concise book, so he doesn't go into all the vast details. And inshallah, we'll leave it there for this particular work, unless there's any questions, sir.
I was kind of interested in, you said that it has to be something that you can do. And I was wondering, like, what, like, I was thinking of, like, is that, like carnival games don't count? Or, like if it's, like, a scam or something, that's not, like, a real reward?
Yeah, and this is because there's a basis when it comes to, say, like the carnival games, where you're shooting something, and if you pop the certain one, then you get it. This is something that's not permissible, because this is like you're buying and selling, and this is not and you're actually putting something forward, money, that you don't know if you're going to get anything in return for it. And so, of course, like this is a type of gambling, as opposed to someone saying like whoever gets this certain thing, they know they guess there's a type of like jahannam, there's unknown factor in this, but this is also kind of like a bounty hunter. A bounty hunter would kind of be like this: whoever gets this guy to me, you know, this then he'll get this this particular reward. Of course, there's other things that have to do with that, but this is if you see that there's a difference between this and like actual gambling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you do could you do
Like,
whoever with the heaviest rock, I'll give you $100. Is that permissible?
if you have like if you know what rock it is, yeah, like you got a big heavy rock in front of you, and you say whoever can lift this up, then I'll give you $100. Yeah.
Same thing with like I don't know, 4 horses are racing. Whoever's horse wins this, I'll reward you.
Yeah. Yeah. In a certain way, but there's this would come into another chapter which we talk about musabaqa, like for racing and whatnot. There's certain things that have to do with that, inshallah.
Interesting.
But that is similar to it, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Patiently good.
Yep.
Inshallah.
All right. Any other questions? We'll move forward.
Alhamdulillah. Very clear.
All right. So the next thing we're gonna go over is renting farmland, and we talked about previously the musabaqa, and I gave it just a brief thing. And today I'm talking about musabaqa, which is musaqa, which is that someone would work a land, and then they would get a portion of that land in return, or like they would get a portion of the yield of the produce in return for that, and this we'll talk about here, which is another type of working, which is, and the author here, he mentioned that musaqa is only permissible for dates and grapes. So if someone is doing dates and grapes, that's the only time it's permissible. It's not permissible with any other types of crops or produce. But here he's going to talk about something that's a little different, which is, can you rent out the land? And different types of ways that you can rent out a land. So you have an owner that owns a farmland, and he doesn't necessarily, he's not going to use it himself, but he wants to rent it out to a farmer that can use it and whatnot. And so here he says, the author, starting here, he says, فَصْلٌ وَإِذَا دَفَعَ إِلَى رَجُلٍ أَرْضًا لِيَزْرَعَهَا وَشَرَطَ لَهُ جُزًا مَعْلُومًا مِنْ رَيْعِهَا لَمْ يَجُزْ. And so he says here, if the owner of a land was to give land to a person to farm it, and made it a condition for him to give him a set percentage of the produce, this would be impermissible. And this is what is called, there's 2 different words here, and one is like called muzara'a or mukhabara, which is, there's a little difference between, what's the difference between these 2 words? Are they the same thing? I won't go into that right now, but this is basically, can I do that transaction? So like say I want to do something other than grapes and dates. So I want to give land to someone that he's going to grow. Maybe he's going to grow like lettuce on it. Maybe he's got other apple trees or other types of produce. Maybe he's growing wheat and all these things. And then at the end of the contract, I'm going to say, I want half of the produce and you get the other half. And then we'll call it, this is the rent. The price of the rent for this year, whatever, is going to be that I get half of the produce and you get the other half, and then there's no money necessarily involved. So of course, like this is, I'm not for sure how much is the produce going to actually get out. And so this is one of the things, I'm not for sure how much the produce is I'm going to get out of this. And also, he's not for sure how much of the produce he's going to get. He knows just it's going to be split in this certain percentage. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 40-60. However, they agree to at the beginning. He says here it's not permissible, and this is like the view of Imam Shafi'i and the Shafi'i madhab, that they say, according to the madhab, that this is something that is not permissible, this type of transaction. And the reason they say this is because we don't know exactly how much of this is going to be. And there's also some hadiths that came in the meaning that the Prophet ﷺ he prohibited al-muzara'ah and whatnot, and rather he told someone to rent it for a certain amount. And so there's a huge debate in this particular whether it's permissible or not. And like the stronger of the evidences is that it is permissible. And this, and I will say this. And this is the view of Imam an-Nawawi, who was like a top imam in the Shafi'i madhab, and also many of the Shafi'i scholars themselves have talked about that this is permissible, and this is a type of transaction that has been done for ages and ages from the beginning of Islam. It's been done all the way throughout all of these ages, and at the same time, there's never been anyone who's done inkar, or like got up and said, no, you can't do this, and said anything to the masses about that this is an impermissible transaction. So this is almost like a consensus in a sense of like of action, that no one has ever said anything about this thing, and it's something that's known and very widespread. And so this type of transaction is something that would be permissible, and this is like in opposition to like the view of the madhab, of the Shafi'i madhab, but this is looking at the extra dalil from outside of this. But this is something that is actually widespread even today. I was talking to like a farmer from my wife's village. I was talking, or he's not necessarily a farmer, but he has land and he does this with them. I was asking him about it. I'm like, do you do this transaction? He's like, yeah, we do it. Everyone does it. So like if they have some land, they'll get a farmer, because there's nothing on him. He has the land. He gets the farmer. The farmer does what he does. And then at the end of it, they split the produce, and then there's no, so then he can sell the produce and he gets his money from that. And so this is a benefit to the farmer, and also the farmer in this case, he's not going, say the produce all gets destroyed. Then in this case, there's nothing, he doesn't have to pay any money. This is a great thing, a win-win situation for him. And for the other person, maybe he loses a little bit from the money if like the produce gets destroyed, but maybe he gets a lot, at the same time. But of course, the land needs to be suitable for farming and have like water and availability for this. So he says here the solution, because if he said this was impermissible, the solution here is for him to rent it at a fixed price. So he says, the author here, going off of his view that this type of transaction is impermissible, then he says here, وَإِنْ أَكْرَاهُ إِيَّاهُ بِذَهَبٍ أَوْ فِضَّةٍ وَشَرَطَ لَهُ طَعَامًا أو شرط لهم طعاما معلوما في ذمة جاز. So he says, but if he were to rent it to him with gold or silver, like an actual currency, so he sets the actual price for this season, or a specified amount of produce in his credit. Like this is, so he says, I am going to give you such and such amount, like I'm going to give you so many kilos or of produce of this, that, and the other. In response to this, in this case, it's allowed for him to do this. And this is because at this point, if he specifies the amount of produce, then this is similar to salam that we talked about before, which is where someone can order something in the future and they describe what they want it to be. And if they described it all as something, then this as it was as it was like something that someone could buy in this way, also they can pay in this way. So it's something that's known, and so it would be just a debt on him to make sure that this person gets so many kilos of apples, of this type of apple, and say if he was doing it in that sense, or like so many kilos of grain, or however this would be weighed and whatnot. And so this is either this or that, and this way there's no difference of opinion. This is permissible with everyone, even the people that say that the first type of transaction, he said that this is impermissible. The second type is permissible with everyone, but this is the solution if someone were to say that first type was impermissible and follow that view. Any questions on this particular chapter before we move forward? Just to make sure you understand it.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. This one is deep, I feel like. I feel like with the second way, the myth would be permissible. I feel like then you're making it so the farmer, the one who is working the land, is taking all of the risk, like is taking much more risk, while the person who owns the land doesn't have any risk. And so I guess I'm wondering why that is seen as fair or more permissible, rather than sort of both of them sharing the same amount of risk with splitting the produce.
The reason is because we're not looking at this point, we're not looking at the actual produce as what is being rented. We're looking at the land itself. This plot of land is being rented for this amount of money for this period of time. And so you know exactly what it is. You know, the soil is there, everything. And so there's, as you mentioned here, the farmer is taking a risk in this scenario more than the other one. But also look at the other side is, say he gets more, say he actually gets more yield, then the actual renter doesn't get any extra from that yield, as there would be on the other side. The other side, he would get extra from the yield if he gets a lot of yield, and because it's split percentage wise. So there's a difference between that. So like the first side, it is a gamble on one end that we don't know how much that yield is going to be, and then the other one is there's no gamble except that there's a possibility of loss, you know, from the one person. But of course, if something happens, such as like there's no water that's available, then this, of course, this is something that the person who's renting, the renter, he needs to make sure that there is the ability to farm this land first and foremost. Like this land is meant to be farmed. So if this is not farmable anymore, then at this case the contract is null and void, and then they would have to pay for the losses and whatnot.
Well, that makes a big difference, I feel, as well. Because, yeah, then, you know, you couldn't accidentally be like, oh no, the soil is depleted or whatever. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's also more possibility for higher profit if he can get a good deal with the landowner. He might tell him.
As far as like the actual putting a price on it?
He can end up actually only selling them 10% instead of 50%.
Yeah. Yeah, so
it makes sense that if the landlord wants to have sort of a set amount of money, that they sort of need to keep a standard for the land, right? Like they're saying the land is this valuable and they have to keep it that valuable. And if it depreciates under that value, then they don't have the right to claim that they deserve that standard amount.
Yeah, month per month, or a set.
This would be a set season. All of this would have to be, this type of renting, if someone was to do it, it has to be a season where someone normally could be able to harvest. Anything less than a season is not permissible. Because that's the whole point of it. The whole point of it is for someone to farm it and to harvest. So this is based on this essence. If he's not able to get the basic or like the basic point of the rental, then the contract is null and void. Yeah.
Is this first opinion that Shafi'i holds? What are the other madhabs say?
Most of them are on the permissibility of it, and even Imam Shafi'i has a view that is permissible. I believe this is in his al-Qadim. Like in his old madhab, that it was permissible.
His old madhab, it was permissible.
Yeah. So it is a view within it's a view within the Shafi'i madhab that many of the Shafi'is have actually said this is stronger according to the evidences.
Okay. Yeah. And all the other madhabs will pretty much agree with no.
Most of them, yeah. For the most part, this is of the mufradat of Shafi'iyya, like the things that the Shafi'i madhab went off by themselves on. Of course,
the second part with the author is saying is permissible
with everyone. Everyone agrees upon it for the most part. Yeah. There's no difference of opinion with this. So the next chapter we're going to talk about is called Ihyaa al-mawaat, which Ihyaa means like giving life to something, and mawaat is like something that has not been like there's no, it's like a wasteland is what I called it here, reviving the wastelands. And so this is, of course, reviving wastelands is something that Islam has like looked at and given it a lot of attention, because of course this is giving something back to like the people. Like we were put into the earth, and Allah gave us He gave us the ability to use the earth and wants us to use the earth and get benefit from that. And so if we have a land that is like a wasteland, then for someone to get this land and put it to use and actually start using it, this is something that is good. And the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith, he said, "Man amara ardan laysat li ahadin fahuwa ahaqqu biha." So whoever does, he says here, whoever amara, which means like that he establishes or like builds on a land or makes it like he actually puts something on this land, depending on what it is, we'll talk about it. But whoever does this to a certain land, laysat li ahad, that this land isn't something that is on a land that is not for someone in particular, then this person that did this work on this land has the most rights to it. And so this is a beautiful there's a beautiful way for there to be establishment of culture and civilization, and to spread out and into like wastelands. So if someone found a land and then all of a sudden they want to do some whether it's like permaculture work or something, and they make this this barren land, they make it green, and they start raising animals, and they start farming it and whatnot, then all of a sudden this land that was not for anyone in particular beforehand, now they would have the most right for this. Of course, you have to look at the land. If it is actually owned by an individual, then of course this is something else. But if land wasn't owned by an individual, then in this case he would have the most rights for it. So this is what this chapter has to talk about, and he'll talk about some of these issues around it, and then we'll talk about a couple things that are similar to it at the end. So he says here, وَإِحْيَا الْمَوَاتِ جَائِزٌ بِشَرْطَيْن. So he says that reviving the wastelands, which is Ihyaa al-mawaat, is permissible with two conditions. So he brings up two conditions here. And he says the first one is أَن يَكُونَ الْمُحْيِي مُسْلِمًا. So the first thing is that the person who's doing this is a Muslim. And so of course this is a right, and this is a right for a Muslim to do this. Of course, because if you had someone who had a treaty that's not a Muslim doing this in Muslim lands, then they could be grabbing up a bunch of land that and it could potentially be harmful. So this person is a Muslim, first and foremost. And then the next thing is وَأَن تَكُونَ الْأَرْضُ حُرَّةً لَمْ يَجْرِ عَلَيْهَا مِلْكٌ لِمُسْلِمٍ. And so also that this land is free, like hurra, which that no other Muslim has ever owned it. And so this is what it means. So if it's owned by somebody, then of course this land is owned by somebody. We look at this as that. But if it's not owned by anybody, like in particular, because occasionally there's some lands that are owned by a group, but there's no one individually that owns this. Maybe the group of Muslims, they own all of this land, but it's not individualized for an individual. So in this case, he would be able to get that from that by bringing life to it and reviving that land. And so these are the two conditions. So the one is that this person doing is a Muslim, and that the land is not owned by any other people. It's not owned by any other Muslim, or it has never been owned by a Muslim. If it's been owned by someone before, say this land is previously owned by someone, and we don't know who it is, but we know that it's been owned by someone else. In this case, it's lost property, and so it needs to get returned to. Someone would have to go look through and see who does this belong to. And then if they find their heirs, then they would give it to their heirs. If it was from a long time ago, the person already died and whatnot. And so it'd be lost property and be dealt with as lost property. And this has a chapter at the end of the transactions, the book of transactions. And so then he also talks of what is this ihya, this reviving, what does it look like? And so here he talks about, he says, وَصِفَةُ الْإِحْيَاءِ مَا كَانَ فِي الْعَادَةِ عِمَارَةً لِلْمُحْيَا. And so he says here in the characteristics, what counts as ihya? To what point does he have to establish it before he can be considered a muhyi, the person that gives life to this land, that now he has a right to it. And so the characteristics of ihya is what is normally considered an establishment or building, like imara. Imara has multiple meanings. One of it is building something for something of that purpose. So the basic principle between it is, in Arabic, it would be an yuhayyi al-ard lima yuridu. And so that the land is set up and prepared for what he wants to do with it. So it depends on what he's trying to do with this land. So if he's trying to say he has an orchard, then in this case the orchard needs to have some type of it needs to have a place, and he needs to start planting things and have an actual wall around it. Or if it's a pasture and whatnot, then he actually needs to make sure that the things are set up in this way. And he also has if he's building something on it, or building a house, maybe he wants to live in this place, then he actually puts up the house and has a door on it and whatnot. He needs to have the basic things for whatever and also have a roof on the house and whatnot. He needs to have the basic things that would be considered for someone who's using that land for that purpose. He needs to have like that bare minimum there for him to claim that he has a right to this. And so this is of the basic principle for it. So like what normally, and where do we go to like say how much is enough? We go back to the aida, which is which is the cultural customs, and what is normally considered. That's why I translated here. What is normally considered with like people as an establishment or building for something of that purpose. And so this is the basic principle here, and of course there's many details depending on what it is that we won't necessarily go into, but this is the basic thing that has to be talked about here. Also, another thing he's going to go into is something that is similar to this, like someone who's out in the wilderness. Maybe they're out in the wilderness and they're doing some type of establishment out there, and then someone comes to them, like say, and someone comes to them and they're thirsty and they want water, and this person has a well, and he has like some type of water to where he's doing on his property. Then does he have to give him water or no? And so this is what we're going to talk about in this next part of this chapter. Is he says وَيَجِبُ الْبَذْلُ الْمَاءِ بِثَلَاثَةِ شَرَائِطَ. And so he says, and it's permissible, or it's obligatory he's obligated to give water if 3 conditions are met. So like if this person comes to him, he needs water, or if someone comes to him and wants water, like what are the conditions for him to have to give water to this person? One is, he says, أَن يَفْضُلَ عَنْ حَاجَتِهِ. And so he needs to have one, which is like he has more than he needs. So if he only has enough water for him, what he actually like needs for him and his and say his family and his livestock, he doesn't have any more water than just this. In this case, this is different. And then he also says, وَأَن يَحْتَاجِ إِلَيْهِ غَيْرُهُ لِنَفْسِهِ أَوْ بَهِيمَتِهِ. And so, and that someone, this is the other condition, that the second condition is that someone else needs it for himself or his animals. So if someone just wants water from this person and he doesn't have a need for it, does he have the right to just take the water from him? And here, no. If he needs to actually have a need for it, for himself or for his animals. And it needs to be more than that other person has, and more than that person needs. So the first person that's giving it, he has more than he needs. And then the other person that comes, he actually needs it. So these are the first 2 conditions for himself or for his animals, because of course animals have rights as they have a spirit or a ruh. They also have rights to make sure that we take care of them and make sure that they have that they can eat and drink and whatnot. And this is something that's looked into. And so also the third one of these conditions, وَأَن يَكُونَ مِمَّا يُسْتَخْلَفُ فِي بِئْرٍ أَوْ عَيْنٍ. And so also that the water comes from something which is a rejuvenating source, such as a well or a spring. So maybe this person has stored up water, but he doesn't have any extra water. It's just like sitting in a tank on top of his house, but he doesn't have a well that he can get water from. He's just saving this water for a certain period of time. No, he wouldn't have to do this in this case. But if it's from something such as a well or a spring, in this case, this is going to come back. And so like in this case, if it's from like a well or a spring that he has access to, then he would need to give it if all of these conditions are met. And also just a general principle is, if anyone is in dire need, like for their life and whatnot, then this is obligatory to give. Like for this person, like if he's dying of thirst and whatnot, or his livestock are dying of thirst, this is something that you would have to look into this. Or if like this person and his family are like in serious need, then this would be obligatory for him to give. And in this issue, even if it wasn't from like a rejuvenating source, he would still have to save this person for the fact that he's saving someone's life. But of course, like extra things such as just the need. So there's different levels of need. So one is durura, which is that this person's life is going to be severely affected, or like if not like ended, if he doesn't have this thing. This is one thing that's called durura. And then there's another thing which is a level under that, which is haja. And this is what he mentions here. The word that he mentions, haja, which is something that life will be difficult, but you can still go on with it without it. Like this is like, say, such as like electricity. Life would be difficult for us without electricity, but we can do it for the most part. Like we can get by without electricity. If it cut out, we're still living. We still are able to go about our days and whatnot. But of course, like there's durura, and then there's which is the highest level. And of course, durura, we need to make sure that everyone has these things, such like that no one is is like thirsting or starving to death in front of us and whatnot. And then there's haja, which is like something that is good for them, like for someone to water his flock, like to make sure that his flock that he's running through this area, that he gets water for them. This is good. but maybe he could run to another place later and get it from somewhere else. But if there's extra, then in this case, this is a need, but it's not like a dire need, as opposed to like a durura, which is a higher level. And then there's also a smallest level, which is like tahsinat, which is like things that are nice, like having trees on the street. Like this is something that's nice to have, like shade. If you didn't have shade, it would be, it wouldn't be as fun. It wouldn't be as nice. But these are things that it's not going to create like massive harms. But maybe in like a big scale, it would. And this is what would be looked at in like maqasid al-sharia. And they break these into two different. Each one of these is broken into two different categories. And this will be, inshallah, we'll talk about this in another case in more detail. But this is something to keep in mind when it comes to like giving water. Of course, if anyone is ever thirsty and like in a dire need, then of course, and the people need to give them that water, and that should always be understood. Any questions before we move on to the next chapter? We'll see here if we have time. Wa alaikum salam.
This chapter right here. So you mentioned groups. So like, let me bring this in the modern world right now. So if modern nation state, Muslim majority, if that ruler owns, say, a country with a border, not gonna get too specific, but so they own the country within that border, but they don't necessarily, or they permit people to own land individually. Now, if there's wastelands within their borders, do they own that whole chunk of land? We got in America, we got like the land, the Bureau of Land Management or whatever. It's public land or whatever you want to say, but it's wasteland. They got that same thing out in the Muslim majority country that the government technically owns all the land, but can an individual go and say, hey, this is wastelands and no one's lived here ever, in theory?
Yeah, so without looking at any lands in specific, like any countries in specific, just talking about it in general, yes, there is public land, which is like that is owned in general for the Muslims. It's not, there's no specific owner for this. It's just in general, this is for Muslims. In this case, yes, someone can do this. Because it's not specified for an individual that this individual land is owned by an individual. In this case, yes, this would be that person that would do this, and then of course, like the government would, if they're applying the Sharia, they would go along these lines. Yeah.
Got it. Any modern nation states that are doing that, letting it happen?
I haven't looked into like any particular things yet to see like who's actually doing it or what are modern day examples. I haven't seen it around here, but a lot of times a lot of the land has been claimed or taken up, but of course there's tons of land that's out in nowhere, that people do work it. Yeah. Allahu A'lam.
Wow, pretty cool. The last frontier.
Yeah, no, and of course, like if someone wanted to turn the deserts into Greenland, then that's a great thing. The next couple of chapters that we'll go into, one is waqf, which is like putting, it's like setting something aside for a certain purpose. Yeah, kind of like a trust, but something that someone can do. Like a lot of times this is done for like masajid and whatnot. And then also hiba, which is giving, and also things that are lost. And this will be, and then also wadiya, and this will be the end of this section of muamalat, and then we'll go into like inheritance, inshallah. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, inshallah. Yeah, and waqf is a very important thing that someone understands as well. We'll talk about it, and of course, this is something that we can do, and it's something that we can do to get close to Allah.
وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم لا حجة بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير